A thick veil of mist clung to the canopy, swallowing the dim morning light. The trees, towering and ancient, stood like sentinels over the untamed land. In the depths of this sanctuary, where no roads carved through and no human feet had tread in years, the creatures of the wild moved in a balance as old as time itself. But today, something was different. Jomo, the massive bull elephant, felt it in his bones. He shifted his great weight, the earth sighing beneath his feet. His tusks gleamed as he moved forward, ears fanning wide to catch the slightest murmur of the jungle. He had ruled this expanse for decades, carving his path with strength and wisdom, but there was an unease in the air, something unseen, something waiting. "Well, you're violating my privacy again, Jack Wolf," Jimmy twisted the word. High above, a lone sparrow fluttered, tiny against the vastness. Kiki was a drab little bird, unremarkable in color, but sharp of eye and swift of wing. She had followed Jomo for weeks, watching the great beast from the treetops, darting between branches as he moved below. He was her protector, though he did not know it. His size, his presence, nothing dared cross him, and where he went, she followed. Today, though, she did not feel safe. Jomo's steps were slower, more measured. The usual symphony of life had shifted into something else, something waiting, something hiding. The air carried a scent that did not belong, not the musk of the watering hole or the richness of the fruiting trees. It was sharp, metallic, a warning written in the wind. A sound crackled in the undergrowth. Jomo froze. His ears flared, scanning the shadows. Kiki darted higher, her heartbeat frantic. From her perch, she saw them first. Silent figures, crouched low, moving with intent. Humans. Their scent was wrong. Their bodies, half hidden behind leaves and mud-streaked skin, pulsed with something unnatural. Jomo let out a low rumble, deep as thunder. The forest answered in kind. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, a hush that spread outward like a ripple in still water. He knew men. He knew the tools they carried, the hunger in their eyes. They did not belong here. A movement to his left, another to his right. Kiki's wings trembled. The shadows between the trees deepened. Jomo took a step forward, his enormous footfall swallowing the space between them. The men stilled, crouching in the brush, waiting. Then the first sound of death rang through the forest. A sharp metallic click, a trap, somewhere unseen, snapping shut with brutal finality. Jomo trumpeted, the deep call of a king enraged. Birds lifted in a startled mass from the canopy, their cries sharp against the sudden chaos. Kiki darted between the branches, her tiny body frantic with the knowledge that something terrible had been set in motion. Then, a whistle, low, unnatural, a signal. Jomo lunged forward, his massive form tearing through the foliage, trampling the undergrowth beneath him. A net lashed out from the darkness, thick and coarse, sinking over his flank. He roared, thrashing against it, but more figures moved in. Silent, calculated. Kiki dove, her tiny body useless against the force of men, but she screamed, her voice piercing through the chaos. Jomo bucked, tusks slashing through the air, his strength a force against their weapons. But then, a second whistle. Pain. A sharp sting deep in his flesh, a dart, another. His movements grew sluggish, his limbs heavy. The world swayed, the trees bending and distorting, and still, Kiki screamed. Jomo fell. A silence like death blanketed the forest. The men moved quickly, their whispers sharp, their hands efficient. The net tightened, ropes looped around tusks, pulleys prepared. They worked with the ease of those who had done this before, their purpose clear. Poachers. Kiki landed on a high branch, watching, helpless. Her tiny chest rose and fell in rapid gasps. The great Jomo, the one she had followed, the one she had trusted to be the immovable force of this world, lay still. But as they worked, a new sound filtered through the trees. Low, rhythmic, deep, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The herd. First, the faintest tremor in the ground. Then another. Then a rolling wave of movement. Shapes emerging from the thickened shadows, eyes glinting, tusks reflecting slivers of moonlight breaking. The men stilled. Jomo's family had come. They moved without sound, their massive bodies slipping between trees like ghosts. The matriarch led them, her tusks curved and worn, her eyes locked onto the fallen giant. The men hesitated, calculating, weighing the odds. Then Jomo moved. Not much, just a twitch, a slow roll of his massive head, a shift in his breathing. But it was enough. The matriarch raised her trunk, and the air itself seemed to tighten. A low rumble spread through the herd. It was not rage, not yet, but it was something deeper, something ancient. The men knew fear. Jomo's eyes flickered open. The drug still held him, but he was awake enough to see them, his family, his protectors. And above, fluttering between the trees, a tiny bird watched over him, unwilling to leave. The men moved first. A shouted command, a scramble, the slicing of ropes, the quick retreat into the shadows, footsteps vanishing into the depths of the forest. The poachers knew better than to challenge what was coming. And then, silence. Kiki dropped from the sky, landing softly on Jomo's thick hide. He was breathing deeply now, slowly, his great body regaining its strength. The herd surrounded him, forming a barrier of living, breathing stone, their presence a fortress in the wild. Jomo did not rise just yet. He did not need to. For now the forest belonged to him once more. The dense jungle pulsed with life. Morning mist curled through the towering sal trees, their gnarled roots gripping the earth like ancient fingers. The air hummed with the calls of unseen creatures, chirps, clicks, and the distant howl of a lone predator. Deep in this vast wilderness, where few human feet had ever tread, an old bull elephant named Jomo roamed alone. Jomo moved slowly, his massive body swaying with the weight of decades spent wandering these lands. His thick hide bore the scars of past battles, claw marks from desperate tigers, deep gashes from territorial fights with younger bulls. But time had mellowed his aggression, and he preferred solitude now. Each morning he would lumber to the river's edge, submerging his cracked tusks in the cool, glassy water before setting off in search of food. One morning, as he plodded through a clearing, something small fluttered through the air. A tiny sparrow, brown-feathered and frail, darted frantically between the vines. Jomo barely noticed it at first. His world moved in slow, deliberate rhythms, far removed from the erratic energy of smaller creatures. But the sparrow was relentless, circling him in a tight spiral before landing on a low-hanging branch just ahead of his path. Jomo stopped. His deep-set eyes studied the bird. It was panting, wings trembling. He could smell its fear, a sharp, living scent. Something was wrong. The jungle had taught him that fear did not come without reason. A rustle, a shift in the undergrowth. Jomo tensed, his enormous ears flaring wide. The scent of the jungle was familiar. Earth, damp leaves, the musk of animals. But now there was something else, something foreign. The sparrow's beady eyes darted toward the darkness beyond the trees, and Jomo followed its gaze. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate breath. A presence just beyond the veil of foliage. Jomo did not move. nor did he sound the deep rumble that had once sent smaller creatures scattering in fear. The jungle demanded patience. His eyes scanned the shadows, and then movement. A ripple in the green. Not a tiger. He had smelled enough of them in his lifetime. Not another elephant. They never moved this cautiously. This was something else. Something unnatural. The sparrow took flight again, but it did not flee. It circled Jomo, darting forward and back as if trying to lead him. The old elephant took a step forward, the ground quaking beneath his weight. The moment his foot touched the earth, the jungle erupted. A deafening crack, like the snapping of a mighty branch, rang through the air. The undergrowth exploded outward as a massive snare buried beneath the leaves yanked upward. In a heartbeat, steel cables coiled around Jomo's front leg. Panic surged through him, a deep primal terror. He trumpeted, a sound that shook the very trees, and reared back. The cables burned against his skin, biting deep. His enormous strength was his enemy now. The harder he pulled, the tighter the snare became. He could feel the ground give way beneath his thrashing, his trapped leg sinking further into the cruel embrace of the trap. Above, the sparrow cried out, a high, shrill note lost in the echoes of Jomo's bellows. But as the elephant fought, another sound entered the chaos. A metallic clinking. A scent more distinct now. Oil, sweat, iron. Humans. Poachers. Jomo stilled, his heaving breath sending clouds of mist into the cool morning air. The trap had not been set at random. They had been watching, waiting. The jungle had whispered of them in the past. Bodies left to rot, tusks missing, the scent of death where no predator had fed. Footsteps, soft at first but gaining confidence. The presence of men. The sparrow, still circling, dove into the brush ahead. Jomo's eyes followed its movement just as he saw what lay beneath the leaves. A second snare, meant for another foot. The realization cut through his panic. He was not meant to be caught here. He was meant to be held, subdued, while the rest of the poachers closed in. Jomo did not move. He did not thrash. He simply breathed, waiting, listening. The men approached. Their voices were low, hushed, their rifles glinting in the morning light. One of them, braver than the rest, took a step forward, testing the elephant's stillness. And then Jomo moved. Not away, not back. Forward. With every ounce of his remaining strength, he lunged toward the hidden snare. His trapped leg screamed in protest, but his weight, thousands of pounds of raw power, pressed down into the earth. The second snare snapped upward, but it did not catch him. It caught the poacher standing closest. The man screamed, a sound that sent the others scrambling. Jomo lifted his trunk, the scent of their fear stronger than blood. They had set their traps well, but they had underestimated the jungle. They had underestimated him. With one final, bone-rattling bellow, Jomo heaved his weight backward. The cable cut deeper, but the tree holding it groaned, cracked, and then snapped. The tension gave way, and Jomo staggered free, his wounded leg trembling beneath him. The sparrow flitted above, watching, waiting. Jomo turned his heavy head toward it, his breathing ragged but steady. The jungle was still again, the poachers long gone. Jomo stepped forward, the pain sharp but bearable. He had survived, and the jungle had spoken. The sparrow darted ahead, leading him toward the safety of the river. Jomo followed, one slow step at a time, disappearing into the mist. The first light of dawn crept through the thick canopy, spilling golden slivers over the dense, dewy jungle. Jomo, the old bull elephant, lumbered forward with slow, deliberate steps, his massive frame a silhouette against the rising sun. His wrinkled skin bore the marks of time, scars from battles long past, the deep grooves of age, and the dust of the land he had ruled for decades. Each movement was measured, each breath a quiet song of endurance. He had long since learned that silence was the language of survival. Above him, darting between the vines, flitted Kiki, a sparrow no larger than a curled leaf. She was a creature of endless energy, weaving through branches with effortless grace. Jomo had come to expect her presence. Each morning her small form would appear somewhere nearby, a flicker in his periphery. She would ride the currents of the humid air, keeping pace with his slow march, her tiny heart a drum that beat in stark contrast to his steady, ponderous rhythm. The jungle stretched endlessly before them, vast and unclaimed. Yet despite the wild beauty, something was wrong. Jomo felt it first. The scent of the earth had changed. The usual perfume of damp leaves and sun-warmed bark was tainted by something unnatural. A bitter metallic tang clung to the air, almost imperceptible but undeniable. His trunk curled slightly, sampling it, trying to decipher its source. His massive ears fanned out, scanning the silent jungle, listening for the murmurs that should have been there. The rustling undergrowth, the distant cry of a predator, the ever-present hum of life. But there was nothing. Kiki, too, sensed the shift. She landed on a high branch and fluffed her feathers, cocking her head. A silence like this was not normal. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, thick and stifling. Even the wind had stilled. She watched Jomo pause, his muscles tensed beneath his rough hide. His every instinct told him to move forward, but with caution. Then, the first sign of danger appeared. The undergrowth ahead, thick with vines and ferns, had been disturbed, not in the way that a passing herd would have trampled through, nor the chaotic frenzy of a predator's ambush. This was something deliberate. Branches had been sliced cleanly. The earth had been dug away in places, revealing pale, dry soil beneath. And then a scent, faint but unmistakable, the musk of unfamiliar humans. Jomo rumbled low in his chest, the sound like distant thunder rolling over the plains. It was a warning, not to anything around him, but to himself. Poachers. The old word echoed in his bones, an instinct passed down through generations of memory. He had encountered them before, those who came with their fire and their long, cruel weapons, their greed outweighing their reverence for the wild. Kiki's wings quivered as she flitted lower, her small frame barely making a whisper of sound. From her vantage point, she saw what Jomo could not. A pit, deep and wide, hidden beneath a careful layer of woven branches and leaves. A trap, designed for a creature of his size and weight. If Jomo had continued his path without hesitation, he would have stepped right into it. She let out a sharp trill, a sound she never made, a single urgent note that cut through the silence. Jomo froze. His heavy eyes followed her movements, then locked on to the disturbed patch of earth. A memory surfaced. An elder from his youth who had vanished without a sound, whose absence had left an emptiness in the herd. He had never seen what had taken him, only the marks left behind. Now he knew. His massive body shifted, carefully stepping away from the danger, but the moment he moved, the jungle around him reacted. A sharp click echoed in the distance. Not a natural sound, not the snap of a breaking branch or the crack of dry bark. It was mechanical, metallic, a trigger being pulled. Kiki shot into the air in a blur of brown and white, her wings cutting the air like blades. Jomo swung his trunk, sending up a plume of dust, and charged. Not forward, but sideways, deeper into the thicker foliage where the trees stood closer together. His instinct screamed at him to run, but he had lived long enough to know that panic was a death sentence. Instead, he moved with purpose, weaving between the trunks, his massive frame disappearing into the jungle's embrace. Behind him, the sharp explosion of a gunshot cracked through the morning air, sending a ripple of terror through the trees. Birds erupted into flight. A distant troop of monkeys shrieked in alarm. The jungle had awakened. Jomo did not stop. He did not look back. Kiki, however, did. From high above she saw them. 3 men, moving like shadows through the undergrowth, their bodies covered in grime, their hands gripping rifles. Their eyes were trained on the space where Jomo had been, scanning, searching. But Jomo was old and wise. He did not flee in a straight line, nor did he leave a clear path. Instead, he wove through the land he had known since birth, where the roots told stories and the trees whispered secrets. Kiki followed, not because she could do anything to stop them, but because she would not leave him alone. The men pressed forward, moving in tight formation. But they had made a mistake. In their eagerness, they had focused on their prey and forgotten the land they trespassed upon. Jomo heard it before they did. The faint, shifting groan of something unstable, a trickle of loose soil, a whisper beneath the earth. The second pit. The poachers barely had time to react before the ground beneath them collapsed. The snare meant for Jomo had caught them instead. The jungle swallowed them whole, their cries muffled as the dust settled. Jomo did not stop. He did not need to. The jungle had already decided their fate. As the morning sun climbed higher, Kiki swooped low, gliding beside the old bull as he resumed his slow, steady path. The jungle was still uneasy, but the silence had lifted. The world breathed again. Jomo had survived. He always had. And Kiki's tiny winged shadow would be there to remind him that even the mightiest still needed a watchful eye. The jungle whispered its secrets once more, and the 2 unlikely companions disappeared into the endless green.